people online. So we want to take advantage of time. And then we're hoping we're very appreciative that you're here, sir. And so, but we do have a number of people online too. So you're not the only one that we're going to depend on for input, if that helps. I'm James Cromar. I'm a Deputy Executive Director at the Broward MPO and the Project Manager for the TRAX study on behalf of the MPO. And as we get started, let me bring up Adam Naeem, who is representing the city of Fort Lauderdale, who is also a partner with us on the TRAX study. Adam?
Thank you, James. I'd like to thank the Broward MPO and FHWA on behalf of the city of Fort Lauderdale in this feasibility study in TRAX for the undergrounding of several railroad crossings. The city of Fort Lauderdale is certainly understanding and cognizant of some of the pain points and troubles in traveling within the TRAX, and the city is more than happy to partner with other stakeholders in figuring out a way to alleviate and make life easier for the residents of the city of Fort Lauderdale. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And for those of you that are coming in now, just so you know, we have a number of people that are also participating virtually online. And so we wanted to keep things moving forward. You didn't miss too much yet, so just part of Adam's introduction, but he'll greet you later again if you like. So, but again, I'm James Carmer. I'm a Deputy Executive Director of Broward MPO and also partnering with the city to develop the TRAX study. I just realized I don't have the clicker to advance the slides. Okay, not yet though. So let me just mention this is workshop 2C, the third of a series of 4 that are taking place this year. For the TRAX study, we are looking at a total of 5 crossings, examining potential for underpass. And we have had a meeting on Davie Boulevard in January. Is that right? And on Sunrise in March. Thank you. And now we're combining a meeting for Sistrunk and Andrews today, and then we'll have a meeting for the Broward Boulevard project in May. So this, as Adam mentioned, this is a project that we received funding from the Federal Highway Administration. And we also want to thank the YMCA here. This is a great facility. We really like this room, so we're glad to be here. Next slide, please. So this is just an outline of what we're going to be talking about today, talking a little bit about the partners that you heard, a bit of an overview, goals. We're going to have our consultant team with Stuart Robertson and Jeff Widener come up and tell us more, and they'll get into more of some of the details as we go forward. Next slide. We talked about the partners. It's the Broward MPO, along with City of Fort Lauderdale, and the Federal Highway Administration that's part of the U.S. Department of Transportation. For those of you who don't know what the MPO is, it's a federal agency, and we have a board of 37 different elected officials, and they represent the interests of the community in decisions about transportation funding and policymaking. We're approaching our 50th year as an MPO, and the idea was that the local populations, local communities should have a say in decisions about transportation. Previously, there might have been somebody in Washington, D.C. or in Tallahassee, they'd get a map and draw a line and build a highway through a community. And there was enough concern about that. So the idea is now making sure that people have some input on the money that gets spent on transportation and the policies that move forward. Next slide. I will just briefly introduce, and then Stuart will get into a little more detail about the different crossings. But as we go forward, we are looking at opportunities to develop roadway underpasses to go under the railroad crossing starting from the south at Davie Boulevard, Broward Boulevard, Sistrunk, Andrews, and Sunrise Boulevard. And so as we go forward, feel free to ask questions about any of those other crossings, but we are going to concentrate on the Sistrunk and Andrews crossings today. We're looking at not only some underpasses, but there also are some opportunities to reconnect the communities in different ways. If we were to move forward with the recommendation to do an underpass, it would take 5, 10, 20 years for that to happen. So there might be some recommendations that could happen in the nearer term, in the next few years, that could help improve access across the tracks and also encourage economic development and different land use considerations. These two particular corridors, Andrews and Sistrunk, we have some parts of Flagler Village, the downtown area, and then the historic Sistrunk community. And so how can we look at reconnecting those communities even better across the tracks, and then also in Progresso Village to the north? Next slide. I believe this is where I will hand it off to Stuart then. And so this is Stuart Robertson, our project manager from Kimley Horn, the consultant side.
Thank you very much, James. I am Stuart Robertson with Kimley Horn. Pleased to be here at the YMCA facility tonight to discuss the Broward MPO and City of Fort Lauderdale's TRAX project. And I do want to speak a bit about the goals of the project, which have been established by the MPO and the city and approved by the Federal Highway Administration, which is part of the United States Department of Transportation. So the very first goal is safety. You see the paragraph there on the first goal, but you can boil that down to safety. One of the reasons that the MPO and the city are undertaking this project is to try to reduce the potential for crashes and fatalities and friends and neighbors losing their lives at these crossings that we have of our streets and sidewalks with the Florida East Coast or FEC Railroad. The second goal on the left in blue, halfway down the slide, has to do with reducing congestion and improving traffic flow through enhanced traffic signal coordination and having reduced delay associated with the railroad crossings. The third goal is creating safer and more accessible routes for people walking and bicycling to help connect across the railroad corridor better for people walking and biking. Then the fourth goal, moving to the upper right on this particular slide, has to do with improving the infrastructure related to drainage and flooding along our study corridors. So drainage and stormwater upgrades would come as part of this project. And then the fifth goal, which is in the middle on the right slide, is ensuring local input guides the project decisions by engaging the community in meetings such as this, but also our online presence as well, where we have a project website and surveys that are available online. So thank you all for coming out to this particular meeting and helping us to get that local input that we really need and that is critical for guiding the way that this project develops and ultimately developing the recommendations that we make to the Department of Transportation. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a project timeline. We are approximately in the middle of this slide, spring of 2026. We're going through our second round of workshops. We got started in the summer of 2025, which was the initiation of this grant. We conducted data collection and analyses, and then we went out to the public for our first meeting in October, as James mentioned, at the Holiday Park Social Center was our first meeting. Then in the winter, we began developing an analysis of the roadway alternatives. And that's what we're going to be looking at with some of our presentation tonight, where we look at what the roadways might look like if they cross underneath the railroad and how that would benefit the traveling public, but also what potential impacts to the surrounding properties would be. Then we move into where we are now, the second workshop. And once we get the results of all of the workshops for each one of the 5 corridors, we will conduct our final assessment and then come back to the public in the fall of 2026, later this year. So please stay tuned to our website and to your engagement channels to be ready for the final workshop. I hope to see you all back at that final workshop as well, which will be in the fall of 2026. Next slide, please. So just a brief summary of our first public workshop back in October. We laid out the initial goals of the project and gained input from the public about what they would like to see. in the project, and that's where we heard a lot about reconnecting communities and having facilities for walking and biking, but also limiting the impacts on the surrounding homes and businesses adjacent to the corridor. Next slide. So of the 5 corridors, now that we are into our detailed assessment phase, we started in the south with Davie Boulevard. That's the southernmost one in the green circle. Then went to the gold one in the north. That was at Sunrise Boulevard. And that brings us to Andrews and Sistrunk. That's the light blue circle and the red circle. These 2 crossings, when you think about where these roads cross the FEC railroad, they cross so close together that we realized we kind of need to address them together, because anything that we might recommend for Sistrunk is going to impact Andrews, and vice versa, that Andrews would impact Sistrunk. So we're looking at this as one community and looking at it in one holistic assessment. And then finally is the black circle there is for Broward Boulevard, the downtown-ish corridor adjacent to the Broward County Transit bus terminal and downtown. That workshop is going to be coming up in May. So next month we will have the next of our second round of assessment workshops that will be for Broward Boulevard. So please stay tuned for that as well. And next slide. So our team has been really looking at the data for the corridor, and that starts with looking at the train volumes. So these are train volumes that are on the FEC railroad. And when I say volume, that basically in the transportation world just means the number of trains that cross any given point. So these are the number of trains that cross the FEC railroad at Sistrunk Boulevard. And there are 3 main types of trains. First are the Brightline trains. We currently have approximately 33 Brightline trains that cross Sistrunk Boulevard and Andrews Avenue on the FEC. The second category is called Broward Commuter Rail, or BCR. And as you can see on the table on this slide, there are currently 0 trains that cross. So why is it 0? Because the Broward Commuter Rail is a proposed transit system that would operate between local towns within South Florida on the FEC railroad. And there would be more frequent stops on the BCR than there currently are on Brightline. However, that train service is not yet implemented. So we have to make an assumption. And that assumption comes from the Broward Commuter Rail Implementation Study. And the future assumption is that there would be 50 to 60 trains per day. So that's under the future assumption column in the center of this table. So that has a big impact on the way that we think about the future train volumes on the FEC is the implementation of this service. So the good news, that would be able to get us around South Florida on trains much more efficiently. However, it adds more train volumes to all the crossings. So we need to think about ways to address mobility and safety moving into the future. And then the row on the bottom of this slide presents the number of trains that are represented by the freight trains that FEC Railway operates. There currently are 13 to 16 freight trains per day. And the projections that we have developed from working with the FEC and understanding what their future projections are for their business would be that this would increase to the range of 20 to 24 in the future. So it all adds up to that there's approximately 46 to 50 trains per day today, but this could grow to over 100 in the future. So this is why the MPO and the city want to study this concept to help local travelers be able to address these additional train traffic movements that may be happening. Next slide. So for each one of these crossings, and we're looking at Sistrunk Boulevard on the map here, our team has studied the the number of people that walk, bike, drive, scoot across these crossings. We're also looking at community facilities such as Sistrunk Park immediately to the west of this crossing, the Sistrunk Marketplace, the new developments that are coming in, such as the Arcadian and others, the Fat Village development adjacent, and recent improvements that have been built, like the work that the city has done with improving the streetscape along Sistrunk Boulevard and improving the traffic safety on Sistrunk Boulevard, and new developments such as the Progresso Point residential community. So all of these are factors that we are taking into account and that have really changed kind of the streetscape, if you will, of Sistrunk Boulevard. And we want to build from what has been done in the past to make sure that we're not doing anything that would necessarily harm good work that has been done in the past, but try to improve safety and mobility for the traveling public. Next slide. And the same thing for Andrews Avenue. In particular, the Andrews Avenue crossing, for those that are familiar with it, it presents us with a certain challenge because Andrews Avenue actually goes through a curve over the tracks. And that curve also includes intersections on either side. There's the Northwest 7th Street intersection that comes into Andrews Avenue. There's also the connection to Flagler Drive and Progresso Drive, south and north of the crossing, respectively. So this crossing has a challenging horizontal layout, if you will, that we want to try to address, and also that has led us to think about some potential modifications that may look at things like pedestrian overpasses that would be open for people walking and biking, but not necessarily for people driving, to help better connect the community. And speaking of the pedestrian crossings, the next slide will show us our pedestrian and bicycle volumes. So these are counts that we have conducted along these roadways. Between Sistrunk and Andrews, there's a much higher pedestrian volume on Sistrunk. And the peak hour tends to be early in the morning. I think as people are walking to the bus stop or people are walking to work, we have a peak hour of 7 a.m. for pedestrian volumes. This is important because at certain times of the year, at 7 a.m., it's still low light conditions. And so people are walking in an environment where we don't yet have full sunlight, and that can create some visibility challenges for being seen by the people who are driving in cars. Andrews Avenue, the peak hour, although the volume is lower, the peak hour is actually even earlier in the morning at 6 a.m. So it's definitely dark for most of the year at that point. And Andrews Avenue, the pedestrian volume peaks at 7 p.m., although again, the volume is much lower than it is on Sistrunk. And the next slide presents the same information just for the traffic counts. So Sistrunk Boulevard, the first thing to note about Sistrunk is that it is a roadway that is owned and maintained by the city of Fort Lauderdale. Andrews Avenue is owned and maintained by Broward County. So just as a point of comparison, each one of the corridors that we're studying has its own unique jurisdiction. Like Davie Boulevard and Sunrise are both FDOT roadways, Florida Department of Transportation. Sistrunk is city, Andrews is county. Andrews Avenue does have a higher traffic volume, and however, it has fewer trucks. Sistrunk Avenue, interestingly, has a much higher truck percentage. So that's another thing we want to take into account. And both of the roadways have rights of way of only 70 feet. A 70-foot right of way, from my perspective as a transportation engineer, is relatively narrow for being able to accommodate these type of grade separated facilities like underpasses or overpasses. It's a real challenge to try to fit these type of facilities into a right of way that's only 70 feet wide. So because of these challenges, the next slide, you'll see that we went out and conducted a field visit of the corridor, and we worked directly with stakeholders Many of the project partners on the corridor were there, including from Broward County Traffic Engineering Division, Broward County Highway Construction Division, the Florida Department of Transportation, and of course, the City of Fort Lauderdale and the Broward MPO, who are the project leaders. So we looked at some of the conditions along the corridor and looked at where the driveways are and got into like where the landscaping is and the sidewalk connectivity and started to really challenge ourselves to try to come up with a solution that works within the fabric of the community without harming the community itself. Next slide. So the next few slides will present the crash data. In addition, I mentioned the safety is the #1 goal of the project, and that is certainly driving everything that we're doing. So on Sistrunk Boulevard, this slide, Sistrunk Boulevard is essentially the corridor in the center of the graphic going from left to right. And you see the FEC railroad traffic going north to south. Sorry, the FEC TRAX from north to south. So there were 15 crashes that occurred over our standard 5-year analysis period. And most of the crashes occurred at the intersection west of the corridor. And the next slide shows that 33% of the crashes resulted in serious injuries. 67% of the crashes, 10 of the 15 had no injuries. Luckily, there were no fatalities within the 5-year look-back period in the study data. And the next slide presents the same information just for Andrews Avenue. And for Andrews Avenue, unfortunately, there were many, many more crashes, 51. 51 crashes occurred in a 5-year period, so that's 10 crashes per year, or approximately 1 crash per month at the intersection of the FEC and Andrews Avenue. The most number of crashes occurred at the intersection with Flagler Drive. So that's the intersection on Andrews Avenue immediately south of the FEC Railroad crossing. And the next slide will show that although there were many, many more crashes, fortunately, not quite as many of them were serious injury crashes. The next slide will show that 20% of the crashes were serious injury. So when it comes to the crash data, definitely Andrews Avenue is something to focus on, but we're also not, ignoring the crashes that have occurred on Sistrunk as well. But because there are so many crashes on Andrews at the FEC, we're starting to think about what some of the proposed modifications could be to help people get across the FEC Railroad, especially those people walking and biking and accessing the bus stops without having to cross the railroad or even cross this challenging geometric situation, as you can see here on Andrews, where we have the intersections on both sides of the corridor, Flagler Drive on the south, Progresso Drive on the north. So this is the point where I'm going to transition to my colleague, Jeff Widener, and he's going to talk about the alternatives that we're looking at from a transportation perspective to try to help solve some of these challenges.
Well, thank you, Stuart. Again, my name is Jeff Widener. I'm Chief Planner with Marlin Engineering, and I want to discuss with you some of the engineering and designing of an underpass. What you have here is what's called a typical section. So think of a loaf of bread and you take a slice. This is like if you took a slice of a roadway and you're looking at it by its profile. So one of the first things I want to review with you is the depth. How deep do we need to go? So by Florida standards, you need a minimum depth of 16.5 feet from the bottom of the bridge to the top of the roadway pavement. So we go down 16.5 feet. Then we need to have the superstructure of the bridge, and that's another 5 feet. So we need to be 21 feet, 5 inches from where the ground level is today. That is called the vertical clearance, but I want to speak in terms that this defines how long the depression needs to be, because we need to go up at a slope that allows for trucks to get back up to surface in both the east and westbound direction. So at Andrews Avenue to the west, we would have to go past Sistrunk Market and probably come up about 2 blocks later and get back to grade. When we go east, when we get to Andrews Avenue, we'll still be below ground. And we have to go underneath Andrews Avenue again at 16 feet, 21 feet, 5 inches. And we will have to go all the way almost to 3rd Avenue to get back up to ground. Andrews Avenue is the same thing. When we go 21 feet down at the railroad tracks, by the time we get to Sistrunk, we're still not back to level surface. And we have to go underneath Sistrunk and go all the way down almost to 4th, actually between 5th and 4th. So this is why we decided to do these 2 roadways together, because they both impact each other. Now that's the vertical depth. Now let's talk about the horizontal, or what's on top. So in order to fit within this 70-foot right-of-way, we need to consider roadway access and driveways to the existing buildings. So think of the Sistrunk Market, think of the buildings just at the east side of the tracks. There's a driveway that comes right out of the parking garage. So we need to have a roadway at level so that people can get in and out of those buildings and to the cross streets. So what we have here is on the top what we call a frontage road. And so that road would allow for right turn in, right turn out access only. And also we need to accommodate for pedestrians. So what we have here is a 6-foot sidewalk. Then we have a 2-foot curb and gutter. We have 11.5 feet, which is required for buses to operate in the corridor. Then we have a 2.5-foot clearance before we get to the wall of the top of the tunnel. If you've ever been on Las Olas on the top of the Kinney Tunnel, there's a wall on the side. That's what we would have to have here. Then 4.5 feet for the construction of a wall for the depression, a couple of travel lanes, and then we do it all over again on the other side. That all adds up to 77.5 feet. And you heard Stuart say that the right-of-way on Andrews and Sistrunk is 70 feet. So this typical section would need about 3.5 feet additional right-of-way on each side. Now, that could work. The city has allowed development along the corridor that required really wide sidewalks, like 20-foot wide sidewalks, and that's called an easement. It's still private property, but we could still maybe fit it in there. There are some properties that have not been developed yet where we would have to purchase right-of-way. Next slide, please. So we looked at an alternative typical section, and this typical section would put everything underground, including bicycles and pedestrians. So again, we have to be 16.5 feet plus the 5 feet of the bridge underneath. Pedestrians and bicycles, you only need 12 feet, so you're not hitting the roof of the bridge. But this would be 52.5 feet. So maybe you could fit it, but what we need to consider is what's on top. There would be no access to the buildings along the corridor. And actually, this is not feasible at all, unless we would have to do complete takes of brand new buildings in the corridor, and that's just not feasible. Next slide, please. So this is a picture from, I think, about a little bit north of 4th, looking north towards the, there's a new construction going on near Sistrunk. And what you can see is the roadway has actually been narrowed. And this is only 1 lane. And there's on-street parking and these big, new, beautiful, wide sidewalks. And if we went in with this depression, we would be taking all of that away. and limiting the sidewalk widths to 5 feet on each side. You know, this is something that I don't think we want to just say is it's not feasible. I think there's not going to be a lot of support for it. And community support is very important for transportation planning projects. Next slide, please. So a visual example of where this has been done in Florida. This is US 27 in Northwest Miami-Dade County. It's a very busy 6-lane roadway. What you see down the way there is a blue bridge. That is the Florida East Coast Railroad. That is a section of railroad that enters the, what's called the Flagler Yard. And they had 26 trains a day and the trains were going 10 miles an hour. This was something that created a lot of delay on a very busy road in Hialeah, Florida, which is a very congested, dense area. So they were able to construct this facility, but you know, it was justified in what's called a benefit cost analysis. What we have to do in the end is assess how much benefit there is in reducing delay, in reducing crashes, reducing fatalities versus the cost. And here, the delay and the traffic congestion was so much and so at a high level all day long that the benefit cost showed that it was worth the investment. It's not a very attractive transportation corridor, but think of before, it was a 6-lane roadway packed with vehicles all day long. Next slide, please. This is something more attractive. This was done in Denver, Colorado. And what we want to do in Fort Lauderdale is whatever we do, we want to make it look aesthetically pleasing and fit into the community. So this is a 4-lane depression that goes underneath. And what you see on top are some pedestrian crossings. And on the right, remember I showed the depression that had the bicycles and the sidewalks a little bit higher than the roadway? You know, they used a decorative railing. They used some decorative pavers in the MSC walls. And it's actually kind of attractive. Next slide, please. So Stuart spoke about looking at an alternative. And one of the goals of this effort was reconnecting communities. So not only are automobiles separated from the east side and the west side, but people are separated from the east side and the west side. This is a public plaza that was built on top of railroad tracks in Denver, Colorado. It's called the Millennial Bridge. And instead of doing a pedestrian bridge, I'm sure you people have seen some locations where you have this bridge where you go up a spiral staircase, go across, and nobody ever uses them because you're tripling the length of the walk and they just cross the street. The idea here was to create a public space. And instead of just doing a 12-foot wide pedestrian path, why don't we create something, it looks like they did almost 70 feet wide here, over the railroad tracks. And Stuart was explaining the complicated configuration at 7th Street and Andrews going over the railroad tracks. Flagler and Progresso come in. This might be an opportunity to do something like this, or between Progresso and Flagler a little bit northeast and connect both sides of the railroad tracks for just pedestrians and bicycles. These are on the table. We'd love to get your feedback on this. And Stuart, I think, is going to come up now and have a little survey.
Thank you, Jeff. So before we move into the next phase of our meeting, which will be questions and answers, we want to move to an interactive survey component of the meeting. So those participating here in the room here at the YMCA, as well as those participating online, can use your connected device or smartphone to go to menti.com and enter the code that you see here, or scan the QR code that you see here to enter our survey room. I'll give folks a moment to do that before we move forward into the survey itself. And if anyone needs to get up to come scan the QR code, that's perfectly understandable. Okay. So we'll move into the survey component now. So if you could please go to the next slide. We'll look at question number 1. Question number 1 says, for what reasons do you typically cross the FEC railway on Sistrunk Boulevard and Andrews Avenue? And please select all that apply. And as folks enter their responses here in the room, as well as those that are participating online on Zoom, we will be able to see the responses populate on screen. Okay, as the responses are coming in, we see that we have approximately 20 responses, about half of which are drive as the mode of transportation. And then of the other responses, 3 walk, 3 bike, 2 transits, and 1 mobility device. Okay, next question. For what reasons do you cross the FEC railway? Select all that apply. So the choices include commuting to work, going to school, running daily errands, and access to medical facilities. Okay. Looks like daily errands is coming out ahead here. And a few more responses coming in. But I think we can go on to the next question. What works well at the FEC railway crossing on Sistrunk and Andrews Avenue? Please describe. We even get a little visual image of the Sistrunk crossing here. And Paulette, I think this is an open-ended question, is it not? So this is where you get to start typing in responses that you want to provide here. Is there anything that works well at these crossings that you would like us to incorporate into proposed transportation alternatives for the study? Okay. I'll give folks a few more seconds on this one since it requires typing and also a lot of hard thoughts. Yeah, I like the response. Water tower is nice to see. It's sort of a piece of Americana's when you see, you know, you're in a town when you see the town's water tower. It always has a nice advertisement for the city that you're in. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next question. This one says, have you ever decided not to visit a destination because of the railroad crossing? So because of the crossings, have you ever changed your plans to not go to some place or go somewhere else because you don't want to cross the FEC? You know that there's going to be a slow train or something like that. Has it ever caused you to decide not to visit a certain destination? Or perhaps just because you may not feel safe crossing it? Has it ever caused you to decide not to visit a destination? Okay. I think we'll go to the next question now, please. Next slide. Okay, this one says, what does not work well at these crossings? Please describe any issues you've experienced at the crossings. So earlier we asked what works well, and we all sort of struggled with that one. So this one says, what does not work well at the FEC railway crossings on Sistrunk and Andrews? And please just give a brief description of any issues that you may have faced at these two crossings. This one may take longer because there's so much to say. Arms coming down with no trains crossing. That is a concern that we've also noticed and discussed with the Traffic Engineering Division at Broward County as well. It is caused by sort of a safety factor that trains have when they're approaching a crossing, even if they're slowing. They may trigger a gate event, but then stop before it gets to the crossing. Then the gates go back up. And it's frustrating to us as people walking, biking, or driving across the corridor because we think, why did the gate go down and no train came along? Then the gate went back up. So those are active discussions that we're having with the railroad companies and with the Traffic Engineering Division, but it's certainly something that I've experienced personally, and we've experienced technically as well during our analyses of the corridor from a traffic engineering and roadway engineering perspective. Phantom closings is another really good way of saying it. Very creative, whoever wrote that. FEC train taking almost 11 minutes. Yeah, this especially happens in the evenings, I've noticed. Some of the evening freight trains do go into the Fort Lauderdale yards, which are south of State Road 84. So those trains begin to slow north of Sistrunk and Andrews, and we start to see them cross the tracks, and then they go slower and they slower and slower because they are preparing to enter the Fort Lauderdale yards south of State Road 84. Future issues with Fat Village driveway. Fat Village development is on the southwest corner of Andrews and Sistrunk. At times, people are stuck on the crossing during traffic and the light starts blinking red for an oncoming train. Yeah, so that is definitely a very scary happening that people will be on the tracks thinking that it's clear and the traffic congestion is so long that all of a sudden a train starts coming and they're still on the tracks and need to take evasive action to move off quickly. That's certainly one of the advantages of having some type of grade separation for through traffic would be to try to eliminate that occurrence. Okay. Thank you for those responses. I think we can move to the next question. Oh, that was the last question. So the next slide is when I get to talk about what the next steps are on the study. So I'll just briefly go through the next steps before opening the floor to any questions or comments that you may have. So our study is what's called in transportation terms a feasibility study, which means it's the initial analysis of a project before any decisions are made about what's going to be programmed for construction or design. So there certainly are no projects that are funded yet, but the good thing is with the feasibility study is that we get to shape what the development of these recommendations are going to be before it goes to the Broward MPO governing board and the City of Fort Lauderdale Commission for their consideration. So the next phase of the feasibility study is the assessment of the alternative options. Those are the options that you saw in the presentation today that Jeff had presented. We will have a third public workshop that's going to come up in the fall of 2026. So we certainly invite you to stay tuned to the project website, accessible here from the QR code. The City of Fort Lauderdale also does a very good job of advertising these workshops within its own engagement channels. And our project manager, James Cromar from the Broward MPO, who you heard from earlier this evening, his contact information is provided here for any direct questions that you may want to have. So I'll leave this slide up so that you can get the QR code or take photos of it as you wish. But also I wanted to ask if anyone has any questions or comments that they would like to ask in front of the whole group. And then after we go through that portion of the meeting, we'll continue the conversation at the boards around the perimeters of the room and also at the plots in the back where we have markers, sticky notes, and we'll provide opportunities for you to dialogue one-on-one with project team representatives to provide specific comments that you may have about certain streets, intersections, buildings, sidewalk, trees, anything that you want to comment on in very specific detail. Our project team would be happy to take those recommendations that you may have on the roll plots in the back of the room. So with that, I just wanted to ask if there's anyone who has any questions, comments, or remarks that they would like to provide about the TRAX study.
We'll do in the room first and then online afterwards.
Okay, Paulette is saying we'll do in the room questions first and then look at the Zoom webinar to see if there are any online questions as well. So if you're on the Zoom webinar, type in those questions.
I have one question. I understand that this is the Broward MPO. What exactly is Miami-Dade County or Palm Beach? What are they doing? Are they doing anything also to address the crossings in their counties? And can you share what they're doing?
Sure. James from the Broward MPO can speak to that.
Yeah, so James Cromer with the Broward MPO. That's a very informed question that you asked. So for everybody's benefit, even though we're in Broward County, we're between Miami-Dade and Palm Beach, and our traveling populations typically go back and forth across all those county lines. So we do coordination on a regular basis with our partners to the south in Miami-Dade and to the north. One of the things that, as the Brightline service was coming in, we were coordinating at the 3 county levels in terms of creating quiet zones and doing safety improvements along all the different crossings to make sure that as more train service was coming in, the roadways would be safer. We know that there have been a number of crashes that have occurred at the railroad crossings, but there have been a lot of efforts to improve the safety with hardening, with medians, with more arms, with signals, things of that sort. And the establishment of the quiet zone so that the horns are not sounding every time the trains go by. And I think there's a trade-off there of the safety and the comfort of the communities. The Broward MPO is currently involved also with Brightline and FEC, and then the numerous cities along the corridor to even put in more investments, looking at if it's possible to close some railroad crossings, because the safest crossing is where there's no crossing. So, but we have balance of people needing to move around. So we're looking at some crossings or how to make those stronger. Then in addition, and Jeff, I'm going to call on you for this. We are looking at some other places where it may be possible to do some grade separations to separate the cars from the cars and peds and bikes from the railroad crossing itself. So in addition to the 5 corridors that we're looking at here, we are also looking in Broward at State Road 84, at Atlantic Boulevard, and Jeff is working on some that are also in Palm Beach. I'm going to let you talk.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was just letting Stuart know. Stuart and I teamed up with Marlin Engineering and Kimley Horn in Florida Department of Transportation District 4 put out a contract. It was just awarded 3 weeks ago to us to do 4 locations in Palm Beach County. Now, we're doing the same thing. We're looking at feasibility. How long will a depression or an overpass, and they actually want us also to look at raising the railroad above the road as an alternative at 4 locations: Palmetto Park Road, Atlantic Avenue, Linton Road, and Forest Hill Boulevard.
And if you are at all interested in Atlantic Boulevard in Pompano Beach, the MPO is going to be hosting a public workshop at the E. Pat Larkins Community Center in Pompano in May. I think the 3rd week of May, May 20th. Yeah, and Jeff reminded me that that crossing study is over the Tri-Rail corridor. So that's the train that crosses Atlantic Boulevard west of 95, whereas on the TRAX project in Fort Lauderdale, we're looking at the FEC corridor. The MPO is also looking at the Tri-Rail corridor as well, west of 95. So thank you for that
Excellent.
question.
Thank you so much for your question. Do you mind saying your name first, sir?
Jerome Jenkins. You just mentioned about doing some tracks above ground. Has that been considered for the Sistrunk corridor?
Tracks
for the
above
rail,
ground
for, yeah, for the
or?
building the railroad tracks up instead of building the road, a tunnel. Just think about maybe building the railroad tracks, maybe even with 95 or something like that, where
It was previously considered as part of a separate effort, but the idea was rejected in favor of looking at putting the streets either below or above the tracks. The thing with changing the elevation of the tracks is that it's much more impactful for a longer distance because trains are not able to handle the steep gradients of climbing up and then down because of their general physics, more so than cars and people walking and biking. So we currently are not considering changing the elevation of the railroad tracks as part of this study, but we are considering changing the elevation of the streets and the people, the facilities for walking and biking.
was it considered?
Yeah, it has been considered in the past, and because of the results of that prior study, is not currently being considered now. However, I do want to clarify that my response was about elevating the train tracks. There is an ongoing effort that's considering putting passenger rail in a tunnel under the New River and connecting to Broward Boulevard with an underground station. That's also part of a separate effort, but would only be for passenger trains, not for the freight trains. I think I have that right, James. Yeah.
You have a question? I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Good evening, Jessica and family and David, just Taurus. We own a home right off of Sistrunk and Sistrunk and Second Avenue. And when we received information about this, we saw some, I guess, possible renderings online. I don't know if that was specific to this project, but the reason why we came out was we saw those drawings and it made us panic because just to think about like what it would look like right now we have direct access to Sistrunk, and if it looks anything like what we've seen or what I'm thinking, yeah, like how would we have access? First, it would look atrocious. And second, how would we have access to Sistrunk? I'm just thinking about, you know, the consideration of the people that actually live there and their access to the main roads.
Mhm.
And also aesthetically, like I don't, I'm thinking of Davie Boulevard and I-95, there's like a overpath where the street is over and then the railroad is underneath. I mean, that's anyways.
Yeah, that
That's
question
pretty big,
gets to some of the information that Jeff presented as part of his presentation as to the access impacts that would be inherent in some of the alternatives that we're considering, especially the alternative where it's a full grade closure. If it's a partial grade closure, there still would be an access road adjacent to the parcels that would not be grade separated. It would still be the same as it is today at the same elevation that would have the sidewalks and the bicycle paths that would provide that access. So the full grade separation option we consider to be much more impactful to the community, but the partial grade separation would help to mitigate those type of access impacts to the community. But the location of the driveways, the location of the bus stops, the sidewalks, the bicycle paths are all very important considerations that our team is taking into account.
So I heard you asking specifically about an overpass. And when these studies are looked at, there has been issues with the public being concerned with aesthetics. And they're more concerned with an overpass because it creates a dark shadowed place. There are hidden spaces. And one of the benefits of the depression would be that you would have a much calmer street in less noise. You might not be able to see the water tower. That's one thing that is a drawback from a depression. But you would be moving the faster moving vehicles who want to go from one side of the city to the other. And we could have a lane on top, which is only for you to come out of your neighborhood. You could only go right in or right out. If you were coming from another direction, you'd have to take a U-turn or just divert your travel to get to the frontage road because it'd be in one direction on each side.
Let me throw in something too, though. Let me throw in something real quick. James Cormor with MPO. Let me talk to you afterward. Also, I'm curious what renderings you saw because we haven't put any up on our site. So, yeah. So, and we'll if maybe afterward we can get you
Yeah.
show them to us. The other thing, and these guys were, I was waiting to see how politely they were going to state it, and I can't remember when you walked into the discussion. But as we look at some of these crossings, we're looking at 5 areas: Davie, Broward, Sistrunk, Andrews, and Sunrise. There are a lot of challenges with looking at doing an underpass at Sistrunk. Some of the things that you're talking about. There's a lot of challenges with doing one at Andrews. And so as we move forward, those 2 particular crossings are kind of pretty low on the feasibility level. That it's, I don't want to say for sure, but it's looking like they're not going to make sense to put those in. And so we have to do the analysis and look at it. But, and again, depending on when you came in, but part of what Jeff had talked about was we have this much width, 70 feet, and to put in that tunnel, or not tunnel, the underpass and the appropriate frontage road requires more space than is available. So it'd be tearing out these beautiful new sidewalks that have come in and so in that regard, these particular crossings are looking like those aren't going to be the best candidates to look at doing anything besides keeping it the way it is now. So, and then sir, you were going to add to the question?
But yeah, no, I just had a question about, because we're right on Second Avenue, Sistrunk, right? Sistrunk Market, that's where we are, right in front of the water tower. So I was just thinking, if that overpass was going to be built, where would it start to go over? Would it block us? That's Second Street completely?
So the underpass, we're not looking at overpasses. This effort, we're only looking at the underpass option. If we do something else, we might be looking at some pedestrian facilities that go over, but they're much smaller and have less of an issue. We would go past Sistrunk Market. We would be coming up at Second, and we would touch down between Second and Third.
So would that Second Street be closed then going towards Sistrunk?
So have you been to the top of the Kinney Tunnel?
Yes.
And so when you're walking down the side street, it's a single lane of traffic, and all you really see is a cement wall. And it has some kind of, they tried to be decorative a little bit, but so then you just have that wall, a couple of feet in one lane of travel in one direction. And then you have another sidewalk and the entrance to your Second Street.
Okay.
That's what it would look like from your point of view.
Thank you for your question.
JJ Hankerson. Listening at the question, I just like to know what streets will be closed with the project that you all trying to do, things you're trying to do, because it's gonna be if it's coming down. I heard you say something about you won't be able to see the water tower. So evidently you got to close some roads to allow that to happen.
Could we please maybe go back to one of the maps that has the aerial view? And maybe I could point out, right now we're doing feasibility design. We haven't designed it yet, and we're really considering whether we put money on the resources on the effort. But as I understand, I can take this and walk over. So this is Sistrunk at the FEC right here. And we have Andrews Avenue here. So to the west, we will be 21.5 feet below the railroad tracks. And then we'll immediately start coming back up. And we'll be able to come back up. I'm on the wrong street. Yeah. Past the market and come up right around here will be what we call tie down. We will be able to come back up to level and tie back into the street the way it is. Going east, this is too short of a distance to get from 21.5 feet below to get up to grade or to tie down at Andrews. So we're gonna have to stay down, go underneath Andrews Avenue, and we won't come up until we get to about Third. And then let's just talk about Andrews. Andrews Avenue, 21.5 feet below. We would come up right about at this location here. Going south, again, we don't have enough room to get underneath Sistrunk to be back up. So we have to stay down 21.5 feet. And we have to go all the way down to just before Fifth.
And if I could just offer some revision of what Jeff said. No, you're good. You're correct. But I wanted to correct and say, it's not that we would do this, is the analysis is showing that to do a tunnel or an underpass, it would require that particular thing. And I think that design is showing us this is probably something we don't want to do. Okay. But yeah, so not saying that we are going to do it. It's like it would do these different impacts, and that's part of the analysis. So just to clarify that the design is saying that, but that's not necessarily a path that we're going to take. So are you comfortable with that?
Well, I would just say again, another important part of all of these efforts and everything that the MPO does and the Florida DOT does, community support is very important. And we're looking at doing a depression in the middle of an urban fabric of a downtown. You know, a lot of times you see grade separations in rural areas, and it's gonna be impactful. And so there are a lot of challenges. And right now we're at the part where we're trying to see whether the challenges outweigh the opportunities. And the challenges are getting heavy.
Thank you. That's a nicer way to say it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Alex Florence. You know, it seems like a lot's going on, like you guys were saying. Would it be feasible to like keep one the way it is and, you know, possibly do it just to the other one? Because I mean, it seems like Andrews, you know, has quite a bit of traffic.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Okay, it is feasible. We're looking at them together again. You know, it wouldn't make sense to advertise one and then the other when they're right in the same area. They both impact most of you, I would think. But again, let's go back to the biggest challenge for Andrews Avenue, again, is the right-of-way. The typical section that I shared was 77 feet wide, and public right-of-way is only 70 feet wide. So if we go beyond the 70 feet, and we only need 7.5 more feet, but only, real estate in downtown Fort Lauderdale is very expensive. And in some locations, we are taking the front of a building, and then the impact is called a full take, and you have to buy the whole property. So again, we're weighing the challenges versus the opportunities. And with the right-of-way, you can actually put a monetary value on it, and we can compare it to the cost of doing something like this. These are going to cost in the tens of millions of dollars, so you better have a lot of benefits to cover the costs. And we do this what's called a benefit cost analysis. And in the end, you know, if you're not over 1.1 or 1.0, that means the negatives outweigh the positives. And, you know, the triangle? Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, if we could go back to the map that was up previously. So one of the biggest challenges for this area here is, and I'm sure you're all familiar with, and I'm sorry, I don't know the names of the buildings, but this triangle is backed by the railroad. And these two buildings, their driveways to their parking garages are on Andrews and on Sistrunk. So we definitely couldn't do something that put the sidewalks and everything underneath, because that would be a complete take. And that means these two properties would have to be purchased, which is just not going to happen. So then we have to go to the option where we have a frontage road on top, just like the Kinney Tunnel. That limits us to 2 lanes through, but people would have, could only go right in and right out because there would be no access across. So again, it's very challenging. And right now we're looking at challenges versus benefits.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff. Okay, we do have a question online. It's from Rhoda Glasgow Fotheringham. Her question is, are there other options that could minimize impacts at the railroad crossing and the overall traffic on Sistrunk?
Yeah, so although the feasibility study is focused on evaluating benefits and impacts for roadway underpasses under the FEC, we do have a task that includes short-term recommendations for quick fixes that we can make to these crossings. And we are actively working with Broward County and the city of Fort Lauderdale to identify those and put them into the study recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Vanessa, could you say if she has any additional follow-up questions?
Okay, while we wait for that, I can also just add a little bit of the perspective that I thought of as Jeff and James were answering the previous question. The two corridors, Andrews and Sistrunk, because the intersection of Andrews and Sistrunk is so close to the FEC Railroad, we realized that we had to analyze them together as one system, not separately. So as you heard from Jeff's description of what the length of impact would be on Sistrunk, for example, Jeff mentioned that the length of the impact is roughly Northwest 6th Avenue to Northeast 3rd Avenue, roughly. So that means that if there is an underpass for Sistrunk under the FEC, that underpass would also have to go under Andrews. So there would no longer be an intersection of Andrews and Sistrunk because Sistrunk would be underneath. So there are some drawbacks to that. There could be some benefits to that. If you're traveling on Sistrunk or Andrews, you wouldn't have to stop at a red light, that intersection. However, if you need to turn from Sistrunk onto Andrews or from Andrews onto Sistrunk, you would not be able to do that. So it would potentially create some diverting traffic. But because those intersections are so close, we are considering them as one system. And we recognize that if one moves forward, the other one wouldn't, and vice versa. But because of the impacts of the narrow rights of way and the impacts to the access, we do think that it's unlikely, as I think James was alluding to, that we're going to find a feasible underpass option for either one of those two. Of course, we're still studying Davie, Broward, and Sunrise, and also looking at potential pedestrian crossing impacts away from these bridges, away from these corridors. But just wanted to clarify that for the 5 main corridors, Davie, Broward, Sistrunk, Andrews, and Sunrise, those are the corridors that we're looking at roadway underpasses. For the bridge options, we're looking at some potential other locations where we could not have these type of access impacts, meaning creating new corridors that don't currently exist.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Stuart. We do not have any other questions online, but this gentleman does.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. That's my first name. Just wanted to ask who asked for this and who's funding the study? Who's even thinking about paying for it? County, DOT, city? And just general, what do you guys feel about it? Do you think it's like a waste of time that you're studying it? Or
That's a loaded question, Ray. That's good. No. James Corman with the Broward MPO. And so why are we doing this? So a few years ago, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was an effort to look at reconnecting communities, looking at places across the country where highways may have come in and divided communities, or rail or anything of that sort. And so there were some funding opportunities, and we had a discussion with the mayor and others in Fort Lauderdale saying, you know, FEC corridor has a lot of impacts throughout Fort Lauderdale. So we put together a proposal with the Broward MPO and the city to look at what could happen along the 5 crossings here. And we'll fill you in a little bit more. I know you came in late, so we can run through the presentation more with you later. But the idea was to look at, is there something that could help address those issues of FEC, the FEC Railroad, that kind of makes a stark difference between the east and the west sides and the north and the south. It's not only the crossings themselves and the traffic congestion that comes as the arms come down, but as we look at the destinations, there are a lot more destinations on the east side of education facilities and retail and things of that sort compared to the west side. And so is there a way that we can help that community be merged more together? So the funding came through the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration to do this particular study. We got $1.5 million from the federal government and the city of Fort Lauderdale. We have Adam here who's representing the city, and they provided a 10% match, a little more than that actually, $375,000 to support this study. We are aware that the city and county are also looking at a bridge and tunnel issue for the New River. And so as that particular effort moves forward, this provides some additional information on some different ways to address, you know, the mayor has talked about how the corridor itself can divide the city and how we can reconnect. So this is a way to explore how that's moving forward. I like your last question about, is this worth it? What do you guys think? And I've been a planner, I'm approaching retirement, so I've been a planner for a long time. Yeah, so, okay. And part of what I like to do is figure out what can we do to make this worthwhile? What can we do that can bring value to the community? Because the community here in the city of Fort Lauderdale, they're putting money in. So we don't want to just come up with an answer that says, okay, here are the three places that works, and then you figure it out. So what can we bring value? Well, if we're looking at any places that we're going to have underpasses, it would take 5, 10, 20 years for those to happen if they do move forward. What would the funding come from? It might be a combination of local, and it could be some county funds and some state funds and maybe some federal grants and such. it would take some time to figure out how that funding would move forward. What I think brings value to this also, and I think Stuart talked a little bit, what happens in the near term, in the next 2, 5, 10 years? Are there things that we can do to help make that crossing and the railroad less of a barrier for the community? And so we're looking at, are there different things to make it easier for people to cross safely, for pedestrians, for bicyclists? Are there things that can happen so that the railroad corridor is not such a divider? And so we're seeing, it's kind of happening already. We're seeing that there's been development along both sides of Sistrunk on either side of the corridor. We're seeing there's development along Broward. Sunrise itself, there's a crossing, and it seems less of, from my perspective, it's less of a barrier because there's reasons for people to want to cross. So there is that part of that economic development land use providing reasons for people to move back and forth, and then also not making the crossing itself be an economic barrier. So that's something that we're looking at for the next shorter term. If a railroad underpass moves forward or not, at least there are some things that could be lower costs that can help address these issues of reconnecting the community. I don't know if you want to add anything?
Yeah. So I believe absolutely it's worthwhile to be doing this study. Port Everglades and Port Miami are two of the largest containerized ports on the eastern seaboard. A lot of the discussions about what are we going to do about railroad at-grade intersections with all of this growth in containerized traffic and the widening of the Panama Canal. We now have ships that pull into Port Everglades and Port Miami that carry like 12,000 containers at once. And each container is the back of a truck. So, we looked into the future, and part of this study was how many trains are going to be in the future. And the analysis was done, and there's going to be about 121 trains per day on the FEC corridor. Now, passenger trains, the gates go down, zoom, 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 zoom. Gates go up, no big deal, but there's going to be a lot of them. But there's also going to be growth in the freight traffic. And I remember going back to the construction of the 17th Street Causeway Bridge. Back in the day, it was at the same height as the Las Olas Bridge, Oakland Park. And the controversy was tunnel or high bridge. And actually the DOT moved forward and they were getting ready to fund the tunnel. But the neighborhood came out and said, we don't want a tunnel. We want to go over and we want to see the beautiful ocean and we want to see and the 17th Street Bridge was built to be at a much higher level for emergency management and for evacuating the beach so that the lower tunnels wouldn't allow boat traffic to be moving. So there's emergency evacuation issues. We do see a lot of benefit on Sunrise Boulevard. Right now, Sunrise Boulevard, the tracks are actually a traffic signal. There's a red light there because you have the two little streets and Flagler intersecting. Every time it turns red, the traffic is backing up through 4th Avenue. So again, the length of the tunnel would have to go underneath 4th Avenue, but this is the one location that connects I-95 to the beach. And you'll be able, if you're going from the beach to 95, before 4th, go underneath the tracks and come up near the entrance of Holiday Park and connect the beach in I-95 and reduce a lot of congestion. So that one is showing some promise. As is, we're about to look at Broward Boulevard, another 6-lane roadway. And Davie Boulevard, we can fit something in there. But the development is not consistent with doing something that dramatic. But definitely is going to be a lot more trains coming, folks. And Sunrise Boulevard and Broward Boulevard are congested now, and they're not going to get any less congested.
So, Paulette, I don't know if we have any more questions. And as you're looking, what I do want to offer, so some of you that did come in a little bit later, if I can get Jeff and Stuart, that maybe we can start the PowerPoint again and walk through it for those of you that missed part of it. Oh, that's easy. We can do it fast. You look familiar. Yeah. Okay, we'll talk. Okay. But yeah, but we'll show because you missed some of this stuff too. So it's easy to run through it, or we can talk at the table either way. Any more questions though? If not, we can go to the group there. Go ahead to the tables.
Okay, we do have a question from Rhoda again. With the new residential areas and businesses on Sistrunk in, I'm sorry,
Progresso Village?
Progressive, yes, area and Flagler area, any project needs to have a minimal impact and ensure that it will assist in the area becoming an even more viable community. I think that's really just a comment and not a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, and I think
Thank you
Jeff,
so much, Rhoda.
I think Jeff hit a little bit on that with some of the potential impacts of any of these underpasses.
Yes.
So again, if we can go to, I think, almost the last slide before the study where we showed Denver, Colorado, instead of doing a pedestrian bridge, they built a pedestrian plaza, a space on top of the railroad tracks. I don't know, again, we're going to the Kinney Tunnel. There are only 3 tunnels in the whole state of Florida. But I don't know if you've seen now, but they put a cap on the tunnel. And they actually went out, you know, you're going down, but on Las Olas Boulevard, you had like a 4-foot wide sidewalk. They went 125 feet out and they put a roof on it and they built a park on top of the tunnel. So we're thinking about looking at opportunities to build some public space and maybe a park on top of the railroad tracks. And you know that diagonal part of the tracks that goes to Laser Wolf between Andrews and Third? You've got a public street on both sides. Could you imagine like a public plaza and a public park up there? And all of the people living in the buildings in the community, and you can have, I don't know, I'm picturing the festival lights and everything.
And I just wanted to show, because we have some other pictures of this particular bridge, but it's kind of hard to tell. But this thing right here, this indicates where the tracks are going underneath. So this goes over railroad tracks. These two, the two sides of this were kind of vacant areas. And the idea was it was public investment that would spur private investment. And so they made some investment in a bridge, and they've had, I don't know how many hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of investment on this side. And there's been hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of investment on this side. And this is a bridge between 2 communities now that weren't there, but there was a plan for growth and development in a smart way that's not dependent on just people driving. It encourages people to walk and bicycle and take transit. And there are ways to drive in with that other tunnel, the previous one. If we can show the previous slide. But yeah, so this one is 1 block south of the other one. So there's space for cars and there's space for pedestrians, but then the other side. So just different ways for people to move around to encourage development. So.
And if I could just add, as a transportation engineer, one of the reasons that we've identified this as a potential example is because, as James mentioned, this bridge is over top of the railroad, not over top of a street. So if a project like this were to be recommended in our study, it would not replace Sistrunk, it would not replace Andrews, it would not replace any other street that we already have. We would still have those streets and those crossings. But this would be a new corridor over the railroad that would connect people from the west side to the east side and provide an attractive place for people to walk and to gather and reconnect communities. And as James mentioned earlier in the presentation, this whole project comes from the US DOT Reconnecting Communities Program, or RCP. So that's ultimately our guiding principle, is connecting communities, not necessarily changing roads or putting in underpasses, or certainly not impacting the community, but reconnecting the community.
Thank you so much, Stuart. We do not have any other questions online. Anybody else in the audience? Any follow-up questions, comments? If not, our team will be here afterwards for a few minutes. If you'd like to meet at the back of the room too, as well, for those persons that are in the building at this moment, you could certainly meet with the project managers towards the back. And those persons that are online, thank you so much again for attending tonight's public workshop. We really do appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to participate in this very important project. Thank you.